Today on Sugar Spun Run, I'll be showing you how I make sourdough bread. Hey Sugar Spun bakers, Sam here, and today I am so excited to be sharing another carefully tested, well-researched, and perfected recipe. Today I am showing you how I make sourdough in my own home. This is a very simple and straightforward recipe, so let's go ahead and get started. Now the first thing you need, this will come as no surprise to you, is sourdough starter. This should be an active, well-fed, nice and bubbly starter. I fed mine early this morning. It has doubled in size, actually a little more than doubled in size. It's ready to go. Now with this recipe, I prefer to use grams, so I use my scale. It makes everything nice and easy, but I will include cup measurements in the recipe description in the written recipe in case you don't have a scale in hand. But you really should get yourself one. It's like 10 bucks and I use this thing all the time. Saves me a lot of dishes. So I'll go ahead and I'll place my bowl on here and tare it. Now I'm going to add 150 grams, which is about 2/3 cup of my active bubbly starter. I went a little bit over, I'm fine with that. I'm not going to fish that out. Next, we're going to add 315 grams of warm water. I recommend the water being between 90 and 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Make sure I tare my scale again. I also like to use olive oil in making my sourdough. You can leave this out if you'd like. You probably have to bump up the water just a little bit, but I use 18 grams of olive oil. All right, we will stir this together until these ingredients are nicely combined. The olive oil is going to try to separate out to the top, that's fine. And then we'll tare our scale again and we're going to add our bread flour. You're going to need 450 grams of bread flour. Finally, we need some salt. You'll need 13 grams of salt. Add this right on top, scattered over my flour. And you can just use regular table salt. I'm using superfine sea salt, but I often sometimes just use my regular table salt too. Either will be fine here. All right, now we're going to mix everything together, and I always do this step using my hands. Now we'll mix everything until all of the flour is mostly absorbed. I should say most of the flour is absorbed. The dough is still going to be a little bit shaggy, and we're going to let it autolyse, which means basically letting it rest for a little bit before we go any further with it. And yes, this is very messy. Another thing I recommend is try not to put any sourdough down your drain. So when I go to clean my hands, I'm not gonna rinse them in the sink. I'm going to clean these off over the trash can with a paper towel because sourdough will clog up your drain really fast. Ask my husband how we know that. So I have a nice sticky mess here. It's not a uniform smooth dough at all. That's fine. We don't want to overdo it at this step. What I'm gonna do is I'll go clean my hands off camera. And now I'm just going to cover this and I'm going to let it sit. It doesn't have to be tightly covered. Instead of plastic wrap, you could use a damp, well wrung out kitchen towel instead. What I'm gonna do is I'll let this rest. It'll need to sit for 30 to 60 minutes before I go any further with it. So my dough has been sitting for almost an hour now, so I'm going to unwrap it. It's finished the autolyse period, so now we are going to begin doing what is called stretch and folds. This is going to help give the dough the proper texture. It's going to help your loaf rise properly in the oven. Now to help keep the dough from sticking to our hands, I just like to take some cool water and just get my hands damp with a little bit of cold water. Normally I just run them under the sink, under the faucet. And then I am going to, first, since this is just after the autolyse period, I'm going to kind of form this into a ball with my hands. We'll skip this step next time we do our stretch and fold. And then we are going to work with the dough in 4 parts and do 4 stretch and folds. And I'll show you what that looks like. We're just going to start at 12 o'clock, pull the dough up, stretch it, and then fold it all the way over across itself for our first fold. And then we'll rotate the bowl, repeat this step, and then one more time. Now I'm going to recover this with my plastic wrap and I'm going to place this in a warm spot. I have an oven with a proofing setting, so I'll put it in there with the oven on proof. If you don't have that, you could put it in your oven with just the oven light on. That tends to give it a little bit of warmth. You don't want it to get too hot, but a warm spot is ideal. Then I'm going to let it rest for 30 minutes. Then I'm going to repeat the stretch and fold process. Now I'm going to continue to repeat the stretch and fold process every 30 minutes until the dough has increased in size about 80%. Now, if you can't get to it every 30 minutes, that's fine, but I do recommend at least trying to several times. Your dough will still rise, of course, if you don't, but what we're doing when we're stretching and folding is we are working some air into the dough and we're helping to strengthen the gluten. This is going to make our sourdough bread, the loaf that we bake up a lot more nicely than it would otherwise. Now, how long this takes is going to depend on a couple factors, such as how warm it is where you are. I find this can take as little as 4 hours. Sometimes it can take even longer if it's kind of cold in my house. So just really look for it to be risen about 80%. This one just needs a little bit more time before we're almost done with it. Okay, my dough has risen quite nicely, and at this point I'm ready to move on to the next step. So before I do that, I'm going to prepare my bread pan. You want to use a 9x5 loaf pan. This is how I make my sourdough. I have made it in a Dutch oven before. You could do that, but this is just how I do it. I'm just gonna add a little bit of olive oil, and I'm going to grease the bottom and the sides of this pan with that olive oil. And my paper towel will soak up any excess. Put this aside, and now I'm going to flour my surface. I have a nice clean surface here. Just add some flour, grab my bench scraper, and I'm going to turn the sourdough out onto my countertop. And make sure I get all of it. Lightly flour my hands. And I try to form the dough a bit into a rectangular shape. It doesn't have to be exact. And then I'm going to grab half of the dough, and we'll fold it up like a book. So I'll fold this over about 3/4 of the way over, and I flatten it a little bit with my hands as I do it. Then I'll do the same thing, or the opposite thing, with the other side. Stretch it a little bit, create a little bit of tension, and then fold it over. And then I flatten it a bit. So I kind of have like a cinnamon roll type of log. Flatten it a little bit, and then I'm going to roll it up, and if it's sticking, just use your bench scraper and roll it up kind of like I'm rolling up a cinnamon roll. And as you can see, I'm sort of flattening it as I go. Add more flour to your hands if you need to. And don't be afraid to use your bench scraper. And then fold that over. Grab this over here. And then I just kind of create a little bit of tension, fold that edge over. And I like to pinch the ends together too, and fold them under. So I've folded the ends and pinched them under. And I want it to have somewhat of a loaf shape. Grab my pan, lift it up, gently drop it into my loaf pan. And I love using a loaf pan instead of a round pot because tomorrow I will be able to bake this right in the loaf pan, and it's so much easier to use for sandwiches. It's just a lot easier for my family in general when it's in a loaf. So I'm gonna cover this. You can cover it tightly or loosely. There are different camps on which is better for sourdough. I have had success with both, but one thing I do want to make sure of is that my plastic wrap is not touching my dough. I don't like that. It's actually press and seal. Don't want it touching my dough. So after I've handled it and put it in the loaf pan, I like to let it sit at room temperature for about 30 minutes. Then all that you need to do is take it over to the refrigerator. All right, I'll take this over to the fridge and I'll see you tomorrow morning. All right, good to see that you are still here. So my sourdough, I like to let it sit in the fridge for at least 12 hours and up to 48 hours before I bake it. Now that our dough has risen overnight in the fridge, it's going to have developed a better flavor and texture than if we just baked it right away. When I pull the dough out of the fridge, I also like to get my oven preheating to 450 degrees Fahrenheit. Then I'll typically uncover my dough, and I'm just going to let it rest on the counter while my oven preheats. Letting our dough sit at room temperature while the oven preheats is going to help it relax and rise a little bit more. Now, once your oven is preheated, we're going to score the bread. You can use a razor blade, a sharp knife. I have this nice little tool called, it's spelled like lame, but it's pronounced lam or lame. Somebody in the comments section can correct me and tell me how it's really said, because Google was a little bit inconclusive on that. And we're just going to slash the bread right down the middle. Scoring the bread like this is going to help it to rise properly, and it's going to keep it from splitting in an unsightly place and making the loaf look not so great. Now, if you'd like, you can get a little bit decorative with this. I'll usually do a couple extra slashes so it looks like I've got a piece of wheat in there. I think it looks like wheat, I think it looks pretty, but this is not super necessary. Now, when you bake sourdough, you want to bake it with a lid. That's one of the reasons that this is commonly baked in a Dutch oven, because you can just put the lid on and put the whole thing in the oven. I bake mine in a bread pan because it's a lot more practical for my family. However, most bread pans do not come with a lid, so we're going to have to improvise. Now, here's what I do. I have two of the same loaf pan. I will link to these in my description, but you don't have to have the exact same pans. But what is helpful is that they both have these little lips on them, because I'm just going to improvise a small oven and I'll cover them and I'm going to put it in the oven just like this. Now say you don't have 2 loaf pans like this. This is a little bit more cumbersome, but what you could do is grab yourself a piece of aluminum foil and make a makeshift lid. Now don't put it flat on the bread, otherwise it's not going to be able to rise up and your bread is going to rise up. So we're going to have to tent it over the bread. So I'll just put it on one side. I like to give it a lot of space to rise. This process is a lot more of a pain in the butt, but it is important to cover the bread because it's going to help it steam properly. Covering it is going to keep it from over browning and getting a crust too soon, so you don't want to skip this and just throw it in the oven. Just use my hand to keep it tented. So you can see I've allotted room for that loaf to grow in the oven. However, I'm just going to be using my other bread pan. So I'll drop these together. We'll take this over to our 450-degree Fahrenheit preheated oven. I'm going to bake it in the center rack for 30 minutes. Now after 30 minutes, I'll remove my lid, whether that's the aluminum foil or it's the other loaf pan, and I'm going to let the bread continue baking for about 23 minutes longer. Now I bake this bread several times a week, as I said, so I know exactly how long it takes in my oven. But if you want to make sure your sourdough bread is baked, grab an instant read thermometer. This is the type I'm talking about, one with a probe that you can insert into your bread. Insert it into the center of your bread, and you're looking for a temperature of 206 to 208 degrees Fahrenheit. All right, we're going to let this bread cool in the pan for about 15 minutes, and then we're going to take a knife and just loosen it from the pan. Sometimes you don't need to do this step. Sometimes it sticks a little bit, so I like to just give myself that extra insurance. And then carefully, because the pan and the bread are still hot, I'm going to invert this onto a cooling rack where I'm going to let this cool completely, at least for an hour or 2 before I cut into it. If you cut into sourdough too soon, the crumb can appear moist in a not good way. It's almost like soggy. So you want to let it cool, again, at least an hour or 2. Once your dough has cooled completely, we can go ahead and cut in. And of course, I want to show you what the inside of this loaf looks like. Sourdough also freezes really well after baking. I will include notes in the printable recipe and over on my blog about how to freeze a sourdough. Push this over to a cutting board. It's a little more practical. Bread knife is best for slicing, and then you just saw through. And that is how I make sourdough bread. Like I said, my family eats this all the time. We absolutely love it, and I think you are going to love it too. If you try this one out, please let me know what you think. I always love hearing from you. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. All right, the best part. That's a really good bread.